Welcome to the world of science fiction and forgotten worlds. Alien Universe. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and never miss a new movies and story from this channel. The first thing the human noticed was not the chains. It was the child's eyes. They were bright. Too bright for someone who spent her days sweeping metal dust from the floors of the largest mining station in the outer colonies. No one else cared about those eyes. To the workers passing by, she was just another small alien slave with a broom that was bigger than her arms. But that human stopped walking. And in a place where nobody ever stopped. That was the beginning of a very big problem. The mining station called Carthos 9 floated in deep space, far away from any friendly worlds. It was owned by a powerful trade company that did not ask questions about where its workers came from. Ships arrived every week, or left every day. And somewhere between those shipments, small lives were quietly broken. Among them was a child. Her name was Lyra. No one on the station used her name anymore. The guards called her Unit 42. The overseers called her the Broom. Lyra had arrived 2 years ago in a cargo container with 30 other alien children from different planets. Some were tall, some had scales, some had soft blue skin. Most of them were gone now. Carthos 9 was not a place where children stayed. Children for long. Every morning, the lights of the station turned on at exactly the same time. A loud alarm echoed through the metal halls, and the slaves moved like tired shadows toward their work zones. Lyra's job was simple. Sweep the mining corridors, sweep the processing floors, sweep the docking bays. If she stopped, even for a moment, the electric collar around her neck would sting like fire. So she did not stop. Her small hands held the broom tightly while she pushed piles of black metallic dust across the cold floor. The dust smelled sharp, like burned iron, and it made her throat hurt when she breathed. But Lyra had learned something very important about survival. Stay quiet, stay small, stay invisible. The guards liked invisible workers. Invisible workers were not punished as often. Above her, huge machines roared day and night as they crushed asteroid ore into valuable minerals. Sparks flew through the air. Robots rolled past carrying heavy containers, and tired laborers dragged themselves between shifts. Nobody looked down. Nobody noticed the small alien girl sweeping the floor, except for one person. 3 levels above the mining hall, a new cargo ship had just arrived at the station. The ship was old but strong, with burn marks along its sides from years of long travel. Its pilot stepped down the metal ramp slowly, stretching his back after the long flight. His name was Daniel Hayes, human, freighter captain, and someone who had seen many strange places in the galaxy. Daniel had come to Carthos 9 many times before. He delivered supplies, picked up cargo, and left as quickly as possible. The station always felt wrong, too quiet, too controlled, too many guards watching everything. But today something made him pause. As he walked through the docking corridor, he heard the sound of a broom scraping across metal. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It was a small sound in a very loud place, but for some reason it caught his attention. Daniel turned his head. Down the long hallway, near a pile of black dust, a tiny figure was pushing a broom that was almost twice her height. An alien. Child. Her skin was pale silver, her hair thin and dark, and her body looked far too small for the heavy work she was doing. Daniel frowned. Children were not supposed to be here. Not even on stations like this. He slowed his steps as he watched her struggle to push the broom forward. Every movement looked careful, almost afraid. Then it happened. The child looked up. For a single second, her bright eyes met his, and Daniel felt something twist in his chest. Those were not the eyes of a worker. Those were the eyes of someone who had been surviving alone for far too long. The moment lasted only a heartbeat. A guard shouted from across the hall, "Unit 42, keep moving." The child quickly lowered her head and pushed the broom again, sweeping the dust like she had done 1,000 times before. Most people would have kept walking. Most captains would have ignored it. After all, Carthos 9 was not their problem. But Daniel Hayes did not move. Instead, he stood there quietly, watching the small alien girl sweep the floor. And slowly, a dangerous thought began to grow in his mind. Something about this station was very wrong. And for the first time in many years, Daniel was thinking about breaking the rules. Daniel Hayes had visited many rough stations in the outer colonies, but something about this one always felt heavier. Maybe it was the silence. Not the normal kind of silence that comes from empty space, but the kind that grows when people are afraid to speak. As he continued walking through the corridor, he tried to ignore the image of the small alien girl sweeping the floor. It should not have bothered him. Places like Carthos 9 were full of things people pretended not to see. But those eyes stayed. In his mind, bright, tired, careful, like someone who had already learned too much about pain. Daniel reached the trade office where cargo captains usually checked in. Inside, a board station officer sat behind a metal desk, tapping numbers into a screen. The man barely looked up. "Cargo ID?" he muttered. Daniel placed a small data chip on the desk. Freighter Northwind. Medical supplies and mechanical parts. The officer scanned the chip and nodded lazily. Docking slot confirmed. Loading will begin in 6 hours. Daniel leaned casually against the counter. "Busy place today," the officer snorted. "Always busy, or prices are high." Daniel glanced through the glass window behind the desk. From there, he could see the mining floor below. Workers moved like ants between machines, and security drones floated slowly through the air. Then he saw her again. The small alien child was still sweeping, moving carefully around the legs of tired workers. She looked even smaller from this distance. Daniel frowned. "Hey," he said quietly, pointing down toward the floor. "That kid down there, how old is she?" The officer finally looked up, confused. "What?" "That worker," Daniel said. "The little one." The officer followed his finger and shrugged. "Unit 42, he replied flatly. "Cleaning duty." "That's a child." "Not our concern," the officer said quickly. "Registered labor asset." Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. "Registered?" he repeated. The officer leaned back in his chair, clearly bored with the conversation. "Company policy. Contracted labor units are classified as property until debt is paid." Daniel stared at him. "Debt?" he asked slowly. "Transportation, food, housing," the officer said. "Standard indenture system." Daniel knew that was a lie. Children didn't sign contracts, and debts like that were never meant to be paid. He looked down at the mining floor again. Lyra had finished sweeping one section and was moving toward another pile of black dust near a giant ore crusher. The machine shook the floor with every heavy impact. She moved quickly, like she was afraid the machine might notice her. "Does she even get breaks?" Daniel asked. The officer rolled his eyes. "Captain, are you here to deliver cargo or start? A charity mission?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. Below them, something suddenly happened. One of the larger laborers stumbled near the ore crusher, dropping a container of raw mineral. The heavy box crashed to the ground, spilling sharp metal chunks across the floor. The worker froze. Everyone nearby froze. A tall overseer walked toward him slowly, holding a control rod in his hand. "Clumsy," the overseer said coldly. The worker tried to speak, but before he could finish, the rod flashed. Electric energy struck the man, and he collapsed onto the metal floor, shaking. The sound echoed through the hall. No one moved. Number. One said a word. Even the machine seemed quieter for a moment. Lyra stood only a few steps away from the fallen worker. She didn't look up, didn't react. She just kept sweeping, slowly, carefully, like nothing had happened. Daniel felt something cold settle in his stomach. "That's normal here?" he asked quietly. The officer shrugged again. "Efficiency keeps production high." Daniel turned away from the window, his expression darker now. He had seen cruelty. Before, space was full of it. But there was something different about this place. Everything was controlled, measured, systematic. This wasn't random suffering. It was organized. Below them, the overseer dragged the unconscious worker away, like broken equipment. A cleaning drone rolled forward to collect the spilled minerals. Lyra stepped quietly into the empty space. She swept the floor where the man had fallen, pushing the dust away as if erasing the moment. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Daniel watched. The small figure through the glass. The officer behind him had already returned to his paperwork. To everyone else on the station, nothing important had happened. But Daniel Hayes kept staring at the child. And now the dangerous thought in his mind was growing stronger, because the problem wasn't just the guards. It wasn't just the company. The real problem was the system that allowed this place to exist. And systems, Daniel knew, could be broken. Daniel left the trade office slowly, but his mind was moving much faster than his feet. He had seen enough stations like this to understand one thing very clearly. Nothing here was accidental. Every rule, every guard, every electric collar around. A worker's neck existed for one reason. Control. The company called it indentured labor. The officers called it efficiency. But Daniel knew the truth. It was slavery with better paperwork. As he walked down the long metal stairs toward the lower levels, the loud sounds of the mining hall grew stronger. Machines roared, metal crashed, and the air smelled like hot iron and burned dust. Workers moved in tired lines between stations, their collars glowing faintly with control lights. Some had empty expressions. Others looked like they had already given up on hope. Daniel passed a security drone floating near the stairwell. Its red eye scanned him for a moment before moving. On. He kept walking. Soon he reached the wide mining floor again. The sound of sweeping was still there. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Lyra was near the far wall now, pushing the same heavy broom across the metal floor. A large pile of black dust had gathered near one of the ore crushers, and she was trying to move it into a collection vent. Up close, Daniel could see how thin she really was. Her arms looked weak from exhaustion, and her small hands were wrapped with old cloth strips to protect them from the rough broom handle. Still, she worked without stopping. He stepped closer. The moment she noticed someone standing near her, her movements changed instantly. Her head lowered. Her body stiffened. She swept faster. Daniel knelt slightly so he wasn't towering over her. "Hey," he said gently. No response. The broom kept moving. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Daniel tried again, lowering his voice. "What's your name?" For a moment, nothing happened. Then the broom slowed just a little. Her voice was so quiet, it almost disappeared under the noise of the machines. "Lyra." Daniel felt a small shock of surprise. "So you do have a name," he said softly. That was when Lyra suddenly froze. She looked up quickly, fear flashing across her silver face. "You?" "Shouldn't talk," she whispered. Daniel frowned. "Why not?" Her eyes moved nervously toward the nearby guards. They punished talking, almost as if the station wanted to prove her point. A loud voice suddenly echoed across the mining floor. Unit 42. Both of them turned. The tall overseer from earlier was walking toward them, his control rod hanging loosely in his hand. His expression was already annoyed. "What are you doing?" he barked. Daniel stood up slowly, keeping his posture calm. "Just asking a question," he replied. The overseer looked him up and down. "A question?" he said sharply. "This is a labor unit, not a tour guide." Lyra quickly lowered her head and grabbed the broom again. "I'm working," she said quietly. The overseer ignored her. His eyes stayed locked on Daniel. "Visitors are not allowed to interfere with company assets," he said. Daniel crossed his arms. "She's a child." The overseer's expression didn't change. "She's property." The words hung in the air like cold metal. Around them, the other workers kept moving, pretending not to hear the conversation. Daniel glanced at Lyra. Her hands were shaking slightly as she pushed the broom again. Scrape, scrape. He looked back at the overseer. "Does she ever leave this floor?" Daniel asked. "That information is not your concern. What happens if she gets sick?" The overseer smiled faintly. "Then she becomes inefficient." Daniel's jaw tightened. "And inefficient units," the overseer continued calmly, "are replaced." Lyra's broom stopped for a moment. Just one moment. The electric collar around her neck flashed suddenly. A sharp shock ran through her body, and she gasped quietly before forcing the broom forward again. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Daniel's hands slowly curled into fists. The overseer noticed, and he smiled wider. "You see, Captain," he said, tapping the control rod against his paw, "the system works perfectly." Daniel didn't answer. He just watched the small alien girl sweep the floor again, her movements slower now after the shock. Then he looked around the massive mining hall. Hundreds of workers, dozens of guards, drones watching from above. A system built to keep everyone powerless. The overseer turned to leave. "Return to your ship," he ordered. "Loading begins soon." Daniel stayed where he was. His eyes followed Lyra as she pushed the broom through another pile of black dust. Scrape, 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 scrape. And in that moment, the dangerous thought in his mind finally became a decision. Because the overseer was wrong about one thing. The system didn't work perfectly. It only worked because nobody had tried hard enough to break it. Daniel returned to his ship, but his mind never left the mining floor. The freighter Northwind sat quietly in its docking bay, while loading drones moved crates of refined ore into the cargo hold. Workers walked back and forth under the cold station. Lights watched by security cameras and hovering drones. Everything looked normal. Everything looked controlled. But Daniel now knew something the station believed no outsider would ever notice. The system here was built on fear, and fear only worked as long as nobody pushed back. Inside the cockpit, Daniel sat in the pilot's chair and stared at the station data screen. Every cargo captain received a temporary access code while docked. It allowed them to monitor loading schedules and docking times. Most captains never used it for anything else. But Daniel Hayes had been flying freighters for 20 years. Over time, he had learned something interesting about large companies. They trusted machines more than people, and machines always left doors open. His fingers moved slowly across the console as he opened the station's network map. Lines of data appeared on the screen, showing cargo routes, security patrols, and labor assignments. Thousands of workers were listed, each one labeled as a labor unit, numbers instead of names. Unit 19, Unit 304, Unit 87. Then he found it. Unit 42. The screen displayed a small profile. Species: unknown. Age: estimated juvenile. Labor status: Debt-bound. Control collar. Active. Daniel leaned closer. Something about the profile felt strange. Very strange. He tapped the screen again and opened the transport records connected to that unit. A new window appeared. Shipment ID. Arrival manifest. Source location. Daniel froze. That can't be right, he muttered. The cargo log showed the container, where Lyra had arrived 2 years earlier. But it wasn't listed as a slave shipment. It wasn't even listed as labor. It was marked as classified biological cargo. Daniel quickly opened the full file. Security warnings flashed across the screen. Restricted data. Company-level clearance. Required. Daniel ignored the warning and forced the system to display the hidden section. The file opened. And the moment he read the first line, his stomach dropped. Subject designation. LIR is 7 species. Classification. Pre-contact civilization. Special attribute. Neural pattern recognition. Extreme level. Daniel blinked. What? He kept reading. The report was written by a research division of the same trade company that owned the station. According to the file, Lyra wasn't just some random alien child taken from a poor planet. She came from a world the galaxy had never officially contacted. A primitive planet. A protected civilization. Which meant one very important thing. Taking anyone from that planet was illegal under galactic law. Daniel felt his heartbeat rising. He read further. 2 years ago, a company exploration team had secretly landed on that world while surveying nearby asteroids. During their mission, they discovered something unexpected. Children from that species had an unusual brain pattern. Their minds could process complex data faster than most advanced computers, not through machines, through instinct. The report described it as natural system reading. They could look at large patterns, networks, and machine structures, and understand them instantly. It was an ability worth billions of credits. So the company had made a decision. Instead of reporting the discovery to the Galactic Council, they stole one of the children, Lyra. Daniel sat back slowly in his chair. The room suddenly felt colder. She's not a slave. He whispered, she's an experiment. Another line in the file caught his attention. Testing result. Subject successfully predicted mining machine failures with 94% accuracy. Corporate conclusion. Subject will remain in labor environment to observe instinctive pattern responses. Daniel stared at the screen in disbelief. They weren't just using her as cheap labor. They were studying her, watching how her mind reacted to the station systems. The sweeping job. The constant movement through the corridors. It wasn't random. They wanted her to see the machines every day, to observe them, to predict failures without even knowing she was doing it. A slow, dangerous anger began building in Daniel's chest. But then he noticed something else. At the bottom of the file was a sealed alert message from the research division. Warning. Subject brain activity shows increasing awareness of surrounding control systems. Probability of system understanding, 87%. Risk level, growing. Daniel's eyes widened. Then he remembered something. Those bright eyes. The careful way. Lyra had watched everything around her. The machines. The guards. The drones. And suddenly, the situation looked very different. The company thought they were studying her. But what if she had been studying them too? At that exact moment, an alarm suddenly echoed through the station. Red warning lights flashed across Daniel's cockpit. Loading drones stopped moving. Security alerts filled the screen. System error mining control network. Failure. Daniel leaned forward quickly. What just happened? Across the station, machines began shutting down. Or crushers stopped. Cargo belts froze. Security drones flickered in the air. And deep in the mining hall, a small alien girl slowly stopped sweeping. For the first time in 2 years, the broom slipped from Lyra's hands, and she looked up. The entire mining station shook. Across Carthos 9, warning alarms screamed through the metal halls. Red lights flashed on every wall, and the giant ore crushers suddenly fell silent. For the first time in years, the machine stopped. Workers looked around in confusion. Some stood frozen, others whispered nervously. Even the guards seemed unsure of what was happening. On Daniel's console, error messages flooded the screen. System failure. Network control lost. Automated security offline. Primary command access denied. Daniel leaned closer to the display. Someone had just taken control of the entire station. And somehow, the system refused to recognize its own masters. Down on the mining floor, the tall overseer was shouting orders. Restart the control grid. Now. But nothing responded. Security drones hung motionless in the air, like dead metal birds. The electric collars around the workers flickered, and then powered down completely. One by one, the glowing lights on the collars faded into darkness. The workers felt it immediately. The pain controls were gone. For the first time, they were no longer being held by the system. The overseer grabbed his control rod and slammed it against the nearest console. "Who did this?" he shouted. "Number." One answered. Across the hall, Lyra slowly stepped away from the broom lying on the floor. The collar around her neck had gone dark like the others. But something different had happened to her. For 2 years, she had watched everything. Every machine, every signal light, every security drone pattern. Her strange mind had quietly connected the pieces. The company believed they were studying her ability. But they had made one mistake. They let her see the system every day. And Lyra had learned, not with training, not with lessons, but with instinct. The sweeping roots had taken her past maintenance. Panels, data ports, network relays. And earlier that day, while cleaning near a wall console, she had noticed something important. A weak point. One small access port that connected directly to the station's control network. She had touched it, just once. Her mind had followed the patterns flowing through the machines like rivers of light, control signals, security permissions, command pathways. The station system was complicated, but to Lyra, it felt simple, like solving a puzzle that had been waiting for her all along. And when she understood the puzzle, she changed it. Back on the bridge of the Northwind, Daniel watched the system logs in disbelief. The command codes controlling the station had been rewritten in seconds. Security locks disabled. Collar controls erased. Overseer access revoked. Someone had quietly taken the entire system away from the company. Daniel laughed softly in amazement. "Well, I guess you didn't need my help after all." Down in the mining hall, the overseer stared at his useless control rod. The device sparked weakly before, shutting off completely. His power was gone. The workers slowly realized what had happened. Chains without locks, guards without control, fear without teeth. The system that held them had just disappeared. Across the room, Lyra walked calmly toward the center of the hall. For the first time, the workers looked at her, not as Unit 42, not as the broom, but as the small child who had quietly changed everything. The overseer noticed her too. "You!" he shouted angrily, stepping forward. But before he could reach her, the station speakers suddenly activated. Daniel's voice echoed through every corridor. "Attention, Carthos 9 personnel," he said calmly. "This station is now under emergency external review." He leaned back in his chair, smiling slightly. "I've just transmitted the station records to the Galactic Council." The overseer froze. Illegal slave labor, kidnapping from a protected world, secret experiments. All of it was now flying through deep space toward the authorities. Daniel continued speaking. Council patrol ships are already on their way. Panic spread across the guards. Some ran. Some dropped their weapons. But it was already too late. Above the station, the first bright lights of approaching patrol cruisers appeared in the darkness of space. Justice was coming. Back in the mining hall, the workers slowly gathered around Lyra. She looked small among them, still thin, still tired, but no longer invisible. Daniel watched the scene through a cargo camera and smiled quietly. One small, alien child had done what no one else dared to do. She didn't fight the system. She understood it. And then she broke it. A few minutes later, the patrol ships surrounded Carthos 9, and for the first time in a very long time, the station belonged to the people who had been forced to work inside it. As for Lyra, the girl who once swept the floors like she didn't exist, the galaxy was about to learn her name.